My guest today is PN Balji. He is a longtime newspaperman in Singapore, worked for 5 different outlets, but most prominently at the New Paper and Today, and you were CEO of Today, correct?
I was holding the positions of CEO and editor-in-chief.
Of Today. Yeah.
CEO of actually the company, which is MediaCorp Press, and editor-in-chief of Today. MediaCorp Press published the Today newspaper. Yeah.
Okay. So long-time newspaperman here in Singapore. 1 year ago, you released a book. 1 year ago, basically right now.
1 year ago.
You released a book, Reluctant Editor, The Singapore Media as Seen Through the Eyes of a Veteran Newspaper Journalist. I wanted to ask you, why reluctant?
Why reluctant?
Mm-hmm.
It's in the book, but I will explain it. It's a job that I never wanted, to be an editor. To be the editor, an editor is quite different, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that is mainly because I had a health scare. I became editor of the new paper in 2000. So I was offered the job by my former editor-in-chief. He was retiring. And I told him no, because I had just had a health scare. I'd gone for an open heart surgery, but maybe a year ago before that. And I was not prepared for that kind of a long haul, tough job, because I knew what the editor of a newspaper means, or will mean. And he took me out for lunch, a long lunch, and he asked me to reconsider. So I said, okay, let me think about it. And I went and I told my wife, and I said, if you say yes, I will take the job. It took her 3 days. She came back to me and said, take the job. So I said, okay, I took the job. But of course, then she cannot get angry with me if I come to work, come home late, because I said, you are the one who asked me to choose the job. Yeah, so I chose the job. And I think it was one of the best professional decisions I have made, because the new paper went on to become very successful. From a circulation of about 55,000, in about 5, 6, 7 years, it went to about 100 over 1,000 daily sales. And then I went on to become the editor-in-chief of the Today newspaper in 2000. In 2000, exactly, 2000. Yeah. That's a very short history.
Oh, I don't know. That's a fairly long time at an organization, I think, especially at that level, right?
Yeah.
Now, I enjoyed the book.
Thank you very much.
I'm an American. I'm an outsider to the Singaporean media culture. So it offered me a lot of insights into history and why things are the way they are. But I think, look, I don't think anyone is going to say I'm wrong if we say that the media culture, the journalism culture in Singapore is tightly controlled, carefully managed. So by telling some of these stories, do you feel like you took a risk by writing this book?
Yes, I mean, even when I was editing new paper and when I was editing Today, there were a number of risks that I took in the kind of stories that we published, But I began to realize later that firstly, the government was not that interested in the new paper, because it was an afternoon newspaper. It was better than the Sun of England, of London, but still huge headlines. And so the government was really more interested in the Straits Times. So I felt that I had that window of opportunity. They were not paying attention to us. So I could push the limits bit by bit, which I did. And of course, when I went to launch today, it was a slightly different ball game. It was a more, for want of a better phrase, it was a more serious paper. And I also, at that time, our Prime Minister was Mr. Goh Chok Tong, who took over from Lee Kuan Yew. And watching Goh Chok Tong, having met him a few times, having listened to his speeches, having spoken to people who knew him, I felt that Goh Chok Tong will not interfere with today. It was a gut feel, and I was proven right. So the journalist's gut feel, can
Right.
be like a manna from heaven. So that was the reason why I was not out there to go against the government, but I just felt that Singapore journalism can be done in a slightly different way, not to follow the Straits Times, the Straits Times style, of presenting a story, writing a story, and I was proven right. Yeah. So that's the reason. Yeah.
Do
Go
you
ahead.
think do you think you took any risks by writing the book, by telling some of your stories behind some of these events over the course of your career?
Yeah. I think there were risks. If you don't take risks, life is very unexciting. So you take risks, what I would call calculated risks. So when you want to cross the road, you're taking a risk, but you take a calculated risk, right? If you're so frightened, you will never cross the road. So I did take risks, and I think my entire career in journalism, and that's the only career I have known, it is all risk-taking. I've mentioned in the book when I started journalism in a newspaper called The New Nation, how we were facing stiff competition from a competitor, and I was in the crime beat doing crime reporting, and the competitor was paying sources to give them tip-offs, and they were not talking to us, the sources, so we had to pay, and we paid, which was a risk. And
Yes.
we were taken to court.
Oh.
And we were fined. But the one that makes me very unhappy about that incident is the people who gave us the tip-offs were government servants, and they were sacked. So that it still sits on me.
It's the classic problem of protecting your sources.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, turning to today, what's your assessment of the current state of press freedom, of journalistic
Current
freedom
state
in
of
Singapore?
press freedom?
Mm-hmm. In
Well,
Singapore.
I would like to change the narrative from press freedom to press responsibility. Because I feel press freedom, if taken to its limits, then I think it becomes irresponsible. I'm not saying I'm against press freedom, but if taken to its limits, it can be irresponsible. So I would say I would look at it from media responsibility. What is the responsibility of a media? And if I want to put it in a very simple way, media's responsibility is to report fairly and accurately. When I mean fairly, I mean to give as many sides of the story as possible. You may not be able to give all sides of the story because of deadline pressure, because people don't want to talk to you, your skills, how to get information out of people, and sources, especially in Singapore, don't talk because of fear. And unfortunately, I would say, most of the information that comes out is from the government. So if you read our papers then and now, I would say 80 to 90% of the stories come from government. This minister said that, prime minister said this, DPM said that, quite boring stuff. So once you have that situation, and that in a way makes it difficult to get a story that has as full a picture as possible. But we must try. I still believe journalists must try. And second thing is, how do you say it? In what language do you say it? You can say it in very sensational kind of language, or you can say it with a good use of language, not saying it directly, slightly indirectly, but your readers will get a sense, hey, something is not right here. So that's what I meant by responsible media. And responsible media doesn't mean just mouthing what the government says. You have to report what the government says, but you give the other point of view by trying to get academics, maybe opposition politicians, people who don't like the government, possibly civil servants who have retired, who may be able to give you a perspective which may add value to the story.
Yes, and those sound like classic journalistic virtues, right? Trying to report around a
yes,
story.
but it's hardly followed.
Well, it's easier to just report the one particular side.
Yes,
I would think. Yeah,
it's easier also to report. She said this, he said that, they said that. It's much more difficult to analyze the story because you need a lot of knowledge, right?
Right.
And you also want to present something that is refreshing. So I'm in the process of thinking of writing an article on the elections that are coming and tying it with the pandemic. I've been thinking about it, talking to people, and still haven't got down to writing it.
Can you give us a taste, a teaser?
A teaser I can give, but I'm still firming the thoughts in my mind. Before I give you the teaser, the people I talk to, they are mainly my circle of friends. They all think that the PAP is the ruling party is going to lose these elections, or it will do very well. But I don't hold that view, right?
Well, that's one or the
I don't
other.
hold that view.
Right?
I don't hold that view because the PAP is a very, very strong government. It has won all the elections since 1959. And but there is a group, I'm not sure how big it is, but I hear this all the time, And when I ask them to tell me why they think that the PAP, the ruling party, will either lose or get a hammering, they all say, oh, this is an arrogant government, this is, they have not handled the pandemic that well. They bring in the migrant workers. I don't call them migrant workers, I call them guest workers. I think once you call them guest workers, they are our guests. Then we will treat them well, I think, So anyway, so these are the issues, But when I ask them, look at the number of cases we have had, look at the number of deaths, which is about maybe 30 or slightly fewer than 30. Look at the other countries, whether it is America or Britain, Indonesia, for example, Malaysia. It's a much better picture, But of course, when we compare ourselves with Taiwan, I think Taiwan has done a better job than us, right? So it's that kind of balance that is missing in the discourse in Singapore. There's a lot of people who are very unhappy. I'm also an unhappy man for my personal reasons, but I cannot use my unhappiness or my personal unhappiness to project on the outcome of an election. So I'm looking at that. Then I'm also looking at the new generation leaders. we call them the fourth generation leaders who are going to take over the government. And personally, I've been quite disappointed with them because, firstly, the way they communicate, they are not getting the point as far as I'm concerned. And they are repeating the same thing again and again and again. It's so boring. And nobody is coming out with something that is a new narrative. If you are a good communicator, you can say the same things, but in a very different way. You can use examples, you can use anecdotes, and flesh out those anecdotes and make that into a big picture story, which they are not doing. And I feel that is very important, especially at this stage. And the third point I've been thinking about, a lot of people are focusing on the new leaders, but I think this election will also have to focus on the Prime Minister. Why? Because this is his last election as Prime Minister. He has already said that he will hand over his Prime Ministership to his deputy in 2 years' time. So would the Prime Minister then want a great victory this election? We are all human beings in the end, right? We want to go off with a big hoorah, right?
Right.
So I think it's a big election for the PM, and I think the PM has not been right in front, not leading it from the front, if I may say. I think he's leading from the back, and there's a good reason for it. Can be explained in a way that this is the battle for this generation, not my generation. I'll give them the support from behind. I'm not sure whether that's the right thing to do, because this is, as they all say, this is not a crisis that we have ever seen in our lifetime. The worst crisis. So wouldn't the worst crisis need the best man to take charge? So these are some of the things that I'm trying to discuss. Yeah.
Yes, certainly the worst crisis in a century,
Yep.
in many ways, at least 70 years,
Yep.
right? And global crisis. Returning to your thought about press responsibility, I'm certainly sympathetic toward that, because as a general idea, freedom without responsibility doesn't add up. If you just exercise freedom, it can lead to a lot of irresponsibility. So I'm sympathetic to your viewpoint on that, and that's an interesting.
Yeah, it's like our children, right? My grandchildren. Can we control them 100%, or should we control them to a certain extent, but let them go, give them their wings, right? Well, they can slowly fly, right? You give them the wings, but you also give them the roots to know that if you are in trouble, this is the place you come back to. Right? So there is no kind of I don't believe in total freedom, because we have responsibilities as grandparents, parents, citizens, right, of the country, and we must carry that responsibility with a lot of kind of a burden.
Yeah, it's an interesting take. Just drilling a little bit into that responsibility idea within the Singaporean context. For those who aren't familiar with them, can you talk about the OB markers?
Oh, of course. That's one of my favorite topics.
Okay.
OB markers. I'm not sure how many of your viewers will know what it is. It's out of bound markers, which is a golf term, which was introduced by the former foreign minister, Mr. Giorgio, many years ago. And he was also the minister in charge of the press at one time. So he introduced this, basically saying that these are the OB markers. The OB markers were never spelled out very clearly. It was something that he said, OB markers, and then the media took it on to mean various things. But there are certain things which are really out of bounds in Singapore: race, language, religion. So these are the OB markers. But the press, because it has worked under a system with rules, government rules, they wanted to know what the OB markers are. And the government was not prepared to tell them, which is, from the government's point of view, is a very smart move. Why should I tell you? You cross the OB markers, then I will tell you. Right? So that this was maybe 20, 30 years ago. But what has happened is that the OB markers have shifted. As society changes, OB markers must shift. I still remember many years ago, even mentioning the word gay, homosexuality, was a no-no in this government. You couldn't even mention it in our reports. Today, hasn't the OB markers on gayhood shifted? I think it has shifted. Right? Many years ago, Prime Minister Mr. Goh Chok Tong gave an interview in the Time magazine where he said, we will allow gays, we will recruit gays in the civil service. Can you believe that?
That's a clear
shift. So you have, as a journalist, you have to pick these signals, right? And then say, hey, OB markers have changed. Society is changing, right? So we have to, as editors, as journalists, we have to, if we don't change with the OB markers or with the changing OB markers, then we are not doing a service to our readers. And the readers will punish us. But that's my view of, sorry.
Well, what you said about how they never clearly spell it out, that is a very savvy strategy, in that clearly spelled out rules can be gamed, whereas fuzzy rules always lead to a bit of hesitancy, right?
Yes, and who decides in the end whether this is an OB marker or not? It's a government, right? It doesn't have to tell you that, right? Because don't forget, media has, the kind of press laws that we have for a first world city, it is one of the most archaic press laws we ever have. The world has seen. One of them is you have to have a license. You have to get a license from the government to publish a newspaper. You have to renew that license every year. And the government doesn't have to tell you, if it rejects your license, why it rejected the license. This has been on for a long time. It's all part of the Newspaper Presses Printing Act. And one other rule, which still many people don't know, which is in the rule book, and that is the SPH, Singapore Press Holdings, which publishes the Straits Times, is a public listed company. The shareholding has 3%, this is a government rule, 3% of the shareholdings has to go to a group of people who are very pro-government, who run big corporations, but they have voting rights, which are many times more than the 3%.
Oh, I see.
Now, the implication of that is, so if Straits Times wants to appoint a new editor, the board can reject it because the 3% shareholders, because of their power, they can say no.
So it's not just laws; it's ownership structures as well.
It's also, which is a law, but it's an ownership structure, exactly. So, and thirdly, and this is the thing that one issue about the Singapore government I don't understand. Maybe I'm a bit naive. I don't understand because, so you have the press license, you have the management shareholdings, and you have the chairman of the Singapore Press Holdings has been a former senior government minister for many years. And the CEO has been a former top civil servant.
Many
I can only,
connections.
sorry?
Many connections.
Yes, his connections is one, but I think the government, the bottom line is the government doesn't trust journalists. They have seen it. They have seen what happens in America, what happens in London, England. Watergate, I'm sure they still remember. The press can bring about the fall of a president of the biggest country in the world, right? Or the most powerful country in the world. All these things have sat on a man like Lee Kuan Yew, and he has kind of passed it on to people. So the trust factor is still not there. And I just feel that governments, like most parents, grandparents, once they have power, they don't want to give it up. They want to control, right? So, but they don't. But what is now changing that scene is the internet. The internet is making the Straits Times a bit more irrelevant. When I say that, I mean from a circulation point of view, Straits Times circulation is dropping nearly every day. Straits Times advertising revenue is really going down dramatically. And as far as I know, the Straits Times has never seen what I call a double whammy. Drop in circulation figures, drop in advertising figures. If you pick up the Straits Times, you will see. This is not the Straits Times we are used to, the kind of ads. And they used to charge a full page color ad in the premium page, $30,000 to $40,000. Now I don't know what they charge. That's a hell of a lot of money, right? So the Straits Times keeps saying, what shall I say? The Straits Times keeps saying in its reports, but our circulation, internet circulation is going up, which is true, but from a very low figure, one. And two, the revenue, the circulation fig, the advertising dollars in internet is like a drop in the ocean. Most of the advertising goes to Google and Facebook. So we are at a kind of crunch point for media, Singapore media. And I'm watching this with great interest.
You mentioned Lee Kuan Yew, the founding minister of Singapore. You said they don't trust the media, and I'm just curious, in your career, did you ever get more hints as to their rationale for why to keep the media contained like this?
You see, and I think this is one of the key things about the ruling party. You look at the way they treat the opposition. They are quite confident of winning elections. My view, I mean, they are a good government. I'm not saying that they are a bad government, but I think people like me want them to be a better government, and that's where the irritation comes in, right? So I think from politics to media or to everything else, they want to be. There is a sense of insecurity, if I can call it, or there is a sense of distrust that if I let go a bit, then I have to let go more, and I have to let go more, and that may not be good, right? The second point I want to make is that although Lee Kuan Yew is no more, but if you look at the policies, look at the way some of our ministers speak, and they bring back his ghost, if they can, which then shows they don't want to change the rule book, right? They don't. for Singapore to move to a more to a place with a bit more freedom, I'm talking about political freedom, media freedom, is for somebody who's going to take over as prime minister to be a rebel. He has to be a rebel. And I don't mean a destructive rebel. No? They'll say, I'll come here and I will do these things, even if Lee Kuan Yew had said these are important. With good reasons, of course. You know? And as long as you have a leadership which is molded in that tradition, you're not going to see any kind of change. And as I'm sure you know, that the way the government or the PAP, the ruling party selects leaders, you look, where are the leaders coming from? Where are the politicians coming from? Army, civil service. Have we really seen a top-notch businessman coming in? Businesswoman coming in? Not that I know. Right? So then it becomes groupthink, right? You all think along the same lines. But as Singapore moves into a totally topsy-turvy world, can we afford that? I'm not sure. I leave that as a question.
Right. And as we already mentioned, it's a precarious time.
Oh, very precarious.
Yeah. Just thinking of the rules that Singaporean media live under, of course, there's the famous Protection from Online Falsehoods and Manipulation Act, POFMA. This is a new quote-unquote fake news law that went into effect in October of last year. It's been used a number of times now. The government says that this gives them the tools necessary to keep online falsehoods contained and under control when they could be destructive. Critics claim that it's used to suppress criticism. What do you make of it so far?
Mine is a middle path, if I can call it that. You know, I'm not a great fan of the internet, of the online world in Singapore, because I see a lot of rubbish going on there. You know? So that's the first point I want to make. The other one is, if you look at the law properly, it is not that the government is saying, I'm going to shut you out. The post that you have, the item that you have posted is wrong, and I'm sending you a POFMA, an order. Then you put that order and you put the word fake clearly, but your story is still there. And you carry my so-called correction, which I think is reasonable to a certain extent. But what I don't like is that only the ministers can give out POFMA orders. Why is that so? Right? Then it gives you a certain feeling. You say, this is not really right. Why only the ministers, right? So I have a problem with that part of it.
With the structure of who makes
and
those
one more
decisions.
thing, it is one more thing. Sorry, before I forget, it is not against opinion. You can write whatever opinion you want, but it's just the facts, right?
Yes.
If they had gone for opinion, then I would have been POFMA'd a number of times for the articles I've written.
Right.
Now POFMA has become a verb, you know, like Google.
Yes, it has.
That's Google, right?
Yes. I'm just curious, who do you think could make those decisions if it wasn't ministers? Like if you were able to propose an amendment, what would it be?
Who could propose an amendment to the law?
No. Who would make those decisions? You said you weren't entirely comfortable with it being in the hands of ministers.
Yeah, the ministers make the decision, but I really don't know what happens in cabinet, right? Cabinet has to be told, or sometimes the minister might have been told by the Home Affairs Minister, hey, I think this is not right, you know, or the civil servants would raise it to the minister, And
Mm.
a good minister will make the decision on his or her own.
Yeah. Yeah. Turning to your book, I guess, for a moment again. There is a quote that I really liked. You quoted LKY, Lee Kuan Yew, at one point, referring to you. You got a call to your boss. Who is that chap practicing Western-style journalism in your organization? And it got me thinking. Do you believe there's a Western versus an Eastern style of journalism? Is that a thing?
Well, let me start. Journalism is journalism,
Mhm.
right? I mean, if you take journalism, whether it is taught in schools or in universities, journalism is journalism. What do? You inform the public, right? I think there's no running away from that. But I think Lee Kuan Yew at that time, this was in the late 70s or early 80s, when I was editing the acting editor of the New Nation. But Lee Kuan Yew had a major problem with Western journalists, rightly or wrongly. I still remember one occasion when Lee Kuan Yew called up the editors and asked, "Why are you using this kind of a picture of me?" That's all. Then he said, "Harold Wilson, former Prime Minister of England, Britain, the media wanted him out, and they always use pictures which showed him in a very bad light."
Mm.
Right? So it has been built up over the years. He has seen how the media has attacked him many times, but he's the type of person, you attack me, I attack you. Come, let's sit down, have a press conference. And so much so that later in his prime ministership, the Western journalists love to have a fight with him publicly. He will give as hard as he gets. And the Western journalists loved it, you know. So there was a kind of a grudging respect by the Western media for Lee Kuan Yew. They invite him all the time to give speeches and things like that. So at the basic level, I don't think there is a difference. But the way the media in the two societies has evolved, I think there is a difference. And I think the difference is the Eastern media, especially the one in Singapore, to a certain, I mean, not certain extent, and even in India, you know, China, of course, they all think they want to play a developmental role, which is to help the country, to the country survives, we survive, you know, that which is fine, but I always felt there has to be a line drawn between church and state, which in countries that I mentioned, either the lines have been blurred or the line doesn't exist anymore, which over time is not going to be good, because even the best governments, which is one of the best governments that in the world is the Singapore government, they need to be checked. The Singapore government says no, we can check ourselves. I don't buy that argument. And if we continue with that argument, we may face a big problem one day. I hope it's not during my lifetime.
Well, you have a story in the book where, let me make sure I'm getting it right, where a minister said, we'll handle any kind of hijinks or corrupt practices. And you said, well, what if the ministers are part of the problem? And he didn't really have any.
No, he did. This was a lunch meeting with one of the ministers. There were other journalists too. So he used that occasion to talk about a column that I wrote, which was about fear in Singapore. So I said there's fear in Singapore. People always look behind their backs before they can say something which is not so nice of the government. And he denied it. He said, no, we don't have, I don't think there is fear. So the conversation went on. First it was a conversation, then went on to a debate where he said that, okay, I don't know how he came to that question. So you tell me, if there is a corrupt minister, you have found somebody to be corrupt, what will you do? So my answer was, I will tell the Prime Minister, because I should not write a story just based on what I have, right? I need to get an official response. I think that's the right thing to do. And he said, no, you should not write the story. Then I said, what happens if the Prime Minister is also corrupt? What do I do? So the conversation ended there. Of course, it was not really a pleasant meeting over lunch. So it ended like that. Yeah.
Yes, I can see that. Yes, being an unpleasant note to end on.
Yeah.
Just thinking of Western media here for a moment, of course, President Trump in the U.S. has been calling the press the enemy of the people, which certainly has impacts in the U.S. But do you see that having any impact on the state of Asian journalism when the president of the U.S. Says these kinds of things?
I don't get that sense. I think most people, if I'm right, if my judgment is right, don't like Trump. Don't like Trump mainly because some of the things that he says, and he is like a loose cannon, if I can use that term. Because they have a little respect for Trump, and I think a lot of the anti-Trump or negative writings about Trump are coming from media, especially the CNN. And I think, generally speaking, there's a support for the American media. Although my personal view is, I think they are taking it a bit to the extreme. That's one. And maybe they are not playing the smart game, the long game, which is the more you attack Trump, the more his supporters, he will get more supporters, and the more the supporters will dig in, which may not be good. But of course, CNN, I think, also looks at it from a perspective of getting more viewers, right?
Right. We can never forget that these are commercially driven enterprises.
Of course, very much so.
Yeah. And that really works to people's benefit.
And also the other thing, of course, like in CNN and some of the other some publications in America, the kind of language they use, even though you may not like him, you hate him, there are a lot of things that he has done wrong, he's still the president, right? So what kind of language do you use? I'm not saying praise him, You can still be classy in your language, right? Without running him down to that extent. And I think that they are going to lose. They're losing the game. I won't be surprised if Trump is reelected.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. We'll see where that.
We will see.
We'll see where that ends up.
We will see.
Based on the 2016 results, I'm not going to make any predictions about.
No, I'm not making a prediction.
No, I know, but
yeah, I just feel that this may be the result in the end. Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, just a couple more things before we wrap up. One, I did want to go back maybe in our conversation and touch upon this. You've mentioned before that self-censorship might be more of a bigger issue than censorship. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. I feel that, self-censorship is something that gets into your DNA and you cannot get it out. Self-censorship about gays, for example, that you are self-imposing on yourself when things have changed, right? So self-censorship is a bigger sin because then you lose your judgment. You are making decisions based on what you think the government wants. But things might have changed. A new minister may not be the same way. The thinking may not be the same as what it was before. And over time, self-censorship will only kill the profession, which is worse than censorship. Censorship, at least you can say, okay, they want me to do it, I'll do it. But this one, you think, okay, this is the way they want me to do it, so I'll do it. But things might have changed. Society changes, right? And I've seen self-censorship at work in our newsrooms. I think it is worse now, you know? But even during my time, there was self-censorship. I'll give you a very good example. I think it's a very good example, talking about gayhood. When I was in New Nation in the 1990s, there was a CNN program. There was this journalist called Riz Khan, who had a program where he invited newsmakers and live program. Questions were put to them live. And Lee Kuan Yew was one of the first to appear on that program. The first question, I think my battery is running low. The first question, he was senior minister at that time. Senior minister, very short, simple, sharp question. What is your stand on gays? And you could see this guy who is unshakable, you know, is so prim and proper, nothing shows on his face. He was kind of a bit disoriented. Then he got his cool within a couple of seconds, got back his cool, and he said, if the public wants us to relax the rules on gays, we will let it be. So I decided that should be the angle of the story for new paper. So I put that as an angle. Headline was, what is your stand on gays, senior minister? And one of the sub-editors came to me and said, I think we will get into trouble with this headline. I said, look, I doubt it, but it still can happen. This is something the senior minister said in public. It's not private. People saw it. So many people saw it. So why shouldn't I use that headline? Of course, the Straits Times didn't use that. So I used it, and I was proven right because I got no call from his office. Now, what does that mean?
Well, that means the OB markers have moved.
Definitely on gays.
Yeah. Right. So it's about testing those boundaries within reason.
I think as journalists, we all have to test the boundaries, not in an irresponsible way, but in a responsible way.
Well, I want to finish up. I want to finish up on a hopeful note.
What? Sorry.
On a hopeful note.
Hopeful.
Note.
Okay, very good.
Yeah.
Good.
So give us what you see as the most positive or hopeful trend in the industry that's taking place right now.
Well, you asked me a very difficult question, man.
Oh, no. I think that's the answer.
No. Yeah, maybe. But I think there are the hope. The one I'll refer to as a ray of hope. Still young people, idealistic people who want to join journalism and do something good, which I think is a hopeful sign. I meet many of them. And there is also the alternative media now for them to go and do it. They can write blogs. They don't have to join a media organization. They can write blogs. And there are the old fogies like me who still think that we can do something for journalism, you know, in our writings especially, in what we write, and because we have been trained in a newsroom which was a very, very tough environment. The training process was a killer. I had a news editor, which I mentioned in my book, news editor when I just started journalism, who I called him a tyrant of a news editor, who got me to interview a big walk participant 12 times. Each time I came back, he threw the copy at me and he said, "This is not good enough, go and interview again." Now that's a kind of hard knocks, if you can call it that, that we took, and we got the better of it, right? We learn our lessons, you know, although it doesn't happen now. So we are not, I don't think we are irresponsible, although some people will think we are, because we are not supporting government all the time, so must be irresponsible, right? So there are hopeful signs, and that one hopeful sign that I'm looking for, which I don't see now, which can come, it has to come from the government. Because the government is the biggest stakeholder in this business in Singapore. Not your readers, not your advertisers, not the journalists. Definitely. It has to come from the government. And this is not a stupid government. This is a very smart government. It's a very suave government. You know? So it must know that the more it controls the media, the more the media will lose out in its revenue, advertising revenue. So I just have some hope there that the government will want a media that is somewhat different. Yeah, fat hope, but
Well, we can always hope. We can always hope.
we must dream, right? As Martin
Yes.
Luther King said, "I have a dream." You know.
Yes. Well, P.N. Balji, this was really a wonderful conversation. I appreciate your taking the time.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much.